So we're going on Facebook Live. Well, good morning, Facebook family. We are Centers for Spiritual Living, Greater Boston, and I welcome you. I welcome our Facebook Live family. We are located at 50 Dudley Street in chilly this morning, Cambridge, Massachusetts. My name is Reverend Ed Tansey, and I, along with Rev G. Stewart, are the founders and spiritual leaders of this community that is so full of love and energy and light and just marvelous, marvelous expressions of the divine, I just so enjoy the fact that we, as a group, are raising the vibration of life from our energies as we just live in alignment with the divine. Just breathe that in for a moment. Breathe that in for a moment. And here at the center, we learn and we practice this phenomenal philosophy called the Science of Mind that was founded by Dr. Ernest Jones. And I invite you to visit our website, cslboston.org, where you can find out more about this philosophy, more about our community, and enjoy all that is there for you to learn from that website. And what I ask you, that is, if you are being spiritually fed this morning, I invite you to go onto our website and click on the donate button and help support this wonderful ministry here in Cambridge. Now, I must say, this morning is a very, very special morning. A very special morning. This is the culmination of Rev G and my ordination gala weekend, and it began on Friday evening with our ordination in East Boston. And today we are so blessed to have with us my mentor for 3 years, Reverend David Ault, who will be sharing his wonderful message today and doing a phenomenal workshop, the Worry Workshop, this afternoon. So if you're anywhere around Boston out there, Facebook Live family, if you want to come down at 1 o'clock, don't come at 3, it'll be over. We invite you to come at 1 to partake in this wonderful, wonderful workshop. So at this point, I'd like to tell you a little about Reverend David. We are so blessed to have his energy, have his energy on this planet. And you know, Reverend David, he just recently stepped down as the senior minister of the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. And right now he is devoting full time to his nonprofit Kaleidoscope Children Foundation. And what that foundation does is serves over 1,000 children. 1,000 children with free education, life skills, and fresh water. And he's doing this in Cambodia, he's doing this in India, and in Guatemala. This is a man who is taking this philosophy and sharing it with the world, and he is impacting so many wonderful, wonderful children. He has created 2 schools in Cambodia, 2 schools in India, and he's working with a school in Guatemala. So without further ado, I introduce our beloved Dr. David Ault.
Good morning, everybody. Some memorable things that I will take away from my visit to Boston. The latest, which is Reverend G's choreography. That was quite impressive. And there are many of you in this room. I know a lot of you were involved in the culmination of that was quite an event on Friday night, and there were so many of you that were deeply involved in if you were, I want you to stand. Maybe even get in front of the camera just so that the world can see how many of you contributed to everything that was. When they used the word gala, you weren't exaggerating. A lot of people there, so it was great to fly in and to be able to offer that to you. So thank you so much. Hi. So you know what's interesting is on all of the many paths of spirituality, and there are many, we hear a word often used, and that is change. And so we, even in the science of mind philosophy, we say change your thinking, change your life. And as I age, I find that my relationship with language also evolves. And I've decided that I don't want to use that word anymore. I'm not so much a groupie of the word to change anymore, because think about this. We can change our mind, but then what can we do? Change it back. We can change a habit, but then we can revert and go back to old ways. And so what change does is it gives wiggle room in order for us to go back to whatever that mindset was, whatever that behavior was, whatever that level of consciousness was. But there's something beyond change, and that is transformation. So a lot of times what we've done is I, myself included, I've labeled myself as a change agent in the world. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I need new business cards. So the new label would be a transformation agent. Because think about it. The oak tree cannot squeeze itself back into the acorn. That's a literal examination of transformation, right? The butterfly cannot go back into the cocoon. And when we start to think of the examples, and there are plenty in the field of nature, what is applicable to us in terms of our humanity? And most of that has to transpire in consciousness. So literally think about this. What has to transpire in such a way that our founder Ernest Holmes said, if we were truly committed, let's say for a year, to transformation, that when we reflected back, we would not recognize who we are. And one of the things that has been so deeply impactful for me to be the mentor of this one in particular is to see that transformation. For those that you don't know, he was a golden retriever, and to see this man physically transform is truly the right use of that word. It is a transformation. Now, what we know is that could go back. But when we start to address the themes and all of the unconscious biases and whatever is related to anything that is directly attacking the divinity of who we are, when we change those things, when we transform those things, then we are not the same. And so I like to think that what we have within us is called an encoded genius. An encoded genius. I love thinking about that. So when we can accept the fact that there is an encoded genius inside of us, then if we allowed it to do what it normally is programmed to do, then we would constantly be in the cycle of transformation. So think about it. There is an encoded genius within the acorn. The acorn automatically knows what to do. There's nothing that's veiling it. There's no dialogue that's telling it that it can't do it. So naturally, the encoded genius is given permission to grow into an oak. There's an encoded genius in a bud. And when the bud, in its free will and in that state, blossoms, it's doing exactly what it was programmed to do. And the bud doesn't even have to go get a life coach. You know, it just, with its encoded genius, it does what it does. And so I would like for all of it, there's an encoded genius in the embryo that knows exactly to transform into that thing which is the infant. So stop for a moment and consider that all of that is inherent within us. That encoded genius. So what gets in the way of that? What gets in the way of allowing that encoded genius to do its thing? Can you imagine if all of the veils of separation and all of the false thought was removed, what we would be evolving into, what we would be transforming into? And that's the beauty then of consciousness. That's the beauty of free will. Is once we are tuned back in, once we pivot back to what I call capital R reality, then we do have the ability to set upon a path of transformation. And it's not a path of going to get something. It's a path of allowing that which already is to appear in its natural state.
Yes.
So oftentimes one of the phrases that's so common is the idea of self-care. We hear that all the time. And self-care with a small s are the things that we externally do for ourselves, right? Who doesn't like a good mani-pedi? Who doesn't like a massage? Who doesn't like all of the things that are classified under this idea of self-care, small s? But in order for you and I to be fully in alignment with transformation, we get to look at self-care with a capital S. And self-care with a capital S is the internal work. It's the coming home, it's the realization of what is already there within us and taking care of self. So there are a few things that I have uncovered that I believe are premium with regards to capital S self-care. And one of them, the first one, I believe is curiosity. To become curious as to why I do the things that I do. To keep circling back and allowing myself to be in that inner inquirer, to be fully in examination. Why is this my trigger? Why do I continue to come back to this particular point? Why, when I stumble and fall, do I run back to what's comfortable for me? And when we become curious, I believe that curiosity heals. Because curiosity is very different than browbeating ourselves, than the blame that we inflict upon ourselves, that metaphoric cat o' nine tails that we're constantly beating and reprimanding ourselves. Whereas curiosity says, no, let me stop and examine why I do the things that I do. There's so much compassion with that. There's so much healing with that. And so when we become curious, we can begin to understand both the complexity and the simplicity, the paradox of what transpires within us subjectively. And by subjectively, I use science of mind language, meaning that within the subconscious. I believe that within the subconscious is a warehouse of all thought. Ernest Holmes even used that expression. You ever thought about that? Inside of us, the subconscious within us is the warehouse of all thought. It's a little mind-boggling, right? And he wasn't referencing just your thoughts, like the thoughts since you came into full consciousness, but the thought of all sentient beings for all time. Think about that. So that means that the thought or the inspiration of a Michelangelo is within the warehouse of this universal subjectivity that you and I have access to. The warehouse of all thought includes that which was the genius of a Madame Curie or someone who invented the thing that rocked your world. That is within the universal subjectivity of us. And so when we think about this warehouse that we are predisposed to, we get to become curious as to what are the things within our own usage of that we fall to and or go to, or what is that the immediacy by which we rebound. And a lot of those things, I call them themes. So in this subjectivity, there are a lot of themes. Let me tell you some that you already have, because I'm psychic. Within your warehouse of all thought is this: I don't have enough time. How many of you think about that or go to that? Now, hear me out. There's no truth to that, except for the fact that we accept it because it's the lexicon of our world, right? And so when you say something or when you feed a theme, that thing becomes your reality. And so even though there's no truth to it, it becomes our experience. So that experience then is what? Hurried and frantic and always looking and examining and being in the anxiety of the fact that we don't have enough time. There are many of you in this room who have this thing. If I want something done right, I have to do it myself. As Rev G is hitting Rev Ed. If I want something done right, I have to do it myself. Now, granted, there's no truth to that, except for the fact that it has become so common, right? And here's what's ironic about that, is highly qualified people will cross our field, will be right in front of us, and if that's an activated theme, we won't even be able to see their gifts and talents.
Yes.
Because the theme is overriding our ability to see beyond the theme. Amazing, right? So I like, in the realm of curiosity, we're still on curiosity, in the realm of that, then there's something that I call the 6-second theory. And the 6-second theory simply means that something that could have taken 6 seconds still governs how you and I think about ourselves to this very day. It's the genesis of a theme. It's where something got launched and then we keep going back to it. Could have been something as simple as a second grade teacher looking at you and saying, why don't you just mouth the words, okay? And you may have loved to sing, but in that 6-second moment, what did you do? You repressed that. You pushed that innocent, encoded genius. You pushed it down. You veiled it, and you created a judgment, and then continued to feed that. And so oftentimes, we have a conglomerate of what I call 6-second theories or themes within us. And curiosity puts us on a journey of bringing all of those things up. My favorite spiritual quote of all times is found in A Course in Miracles. And it says, love brings up everything unlike itself. And I used to go, what does that mean? Love brings up everything unlike itself. And then I realized it says, if I stand before you and I say, I'm an advocate for love, then everything unlike love comes up. Not to test me, but to help me make good on my advocacy. If I say I'm an advocate for peace, then everything unlike peace comes up, again, not because it's bad, but because it wants to let the integrity of my words match my actions. Now it's funny when in my teaching and a lot of students and I share that and they go, well, I'm not going to advocate for anything. No, that's not the way that works, right? So curiosity lets us look at and examine what are some of those things. You know, when I was 7, I was the last of a tribe of children, and we had nothing, literally nothing. One of those cliched stories of poverty. And my father died. And so my mother was a widow with all these children left. And I remember her answering the phone at 3 a.m. in the morning. You know, the proverbial 3 a.m. in the morning phone call. So it was the VA hospital calling to let her know that my dad had passed away. And there weren't enough bedrooms to go around, so I slept on a cot in my parents' room. And I was right near where the rotary phone was. And so when she picked it up, I could hear the nurse, I could hear the information, I could hear her responding to that. And they let her know that my dad had transitioned. She hung up the phone, and then on that rotary dial, she called my aunt, let her know what happened, and then she said this, what am I supposed to do with a 7-year-old boy? And I'm right there, right? So in my 7-year-old mind, I formulated this idea that I must be in the way, that I must be some type of burden. It's an example of a 6-second moment. I mean, I didn't sit up on my cot and go, from this moment forward, I am in the way, I am a burden. But it seeps in, right? And when those things seep in and we don't disrupt them, or we don't become curious or question any of that stuff, it's amazing how the years pile on and the revisitation of that theme then dictates our actions. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I was on a spiritual path that I even had that memory come back to me. And I went, well, of course. That's why there was that part of me that always needed to feel as though I had to operate at 1,000% when everybody else was operating at 100. Just to be able to be in the room at the same time as them. This idea of being a burden and being in the way. And what I've come to understand is we're all walking around with a collection of 6-second moments of these things. And that's the beauty of curiosity. Instead of looking at those things or pushing them down, to become so curious that we welcome them, almost welcome them to an altar where transformation can begin to take place. Where we look at those and say, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that I've held that particular belief, and now not only would I like to change it, but I would like to transform it so that I can explore what is next for me. So curiosity. The next one is principle. It's a word we say a lot in spirituality. The principles. And the principle simply is that all is God. That sounds really nice, right? But how many of us utilize that principle 100% of the time? That principle tells us that all is in divine order. How many of us embrace that and look at every single thing that transpires and go, divine order? I would venture to say, not a lot. But it is that thing that we aspire to. It is the thing that teaches us. It's the thing that grounds us so that when we look at an effect or we look at an appearance, we can say not everything is as it seems. What is beyond that particular effect? And if there is this thing called a principle, which I'm saying I embrace, which I'm saying that I believe in, which I'm saying that I devote my particular experience in this human form to, then how often am I a devotee of that particular principle? Not just when it's easy, but when it is a natural occurrence. And so part of the care of self, capital S, is to continuously go back to the idea of where am I on the scale of my devotion to this particular principle? Not just when it's convenient, but at all times. And so one of the ways that I help students and clients and things is I say, try this little mantra, even in the apparent absence of. So I say, repeat that. Even in the apparent absence of. Say it. Even in the apparent absence of. So even in the apparent absence of love, there is love. Even in the apparent absence of order, there is order. How much am I then invested in wanting to pierce through whatever veil of illusion is in front of me to invoke that, to call it forth? And so that is a part of the care of self, because without that particular touchstone, without that particular practice continuously, then that which is the capital S really doesn't get to be experienced. It means that wherever we go, in whatever circumstance, wherever in the world there might be chaos, that you and I could stand in the eye of the storm and realize that principle is unfailing. It's infallible. That's a big thing. It's a really big thing. And here's the other thing. There's no finish line to that.
Yeah.
Just when you and I think we've got it handled on what we understand principle to be, love brings everything unlike itself.
Yes.
And help, in order to give that devotion and that understanding roots, deep, deep roots. And haven't you ever been in the presence of people like that? You go, ooh, that's a deep-rooted person. because they can stand in the midst of whatever is going on, and that which we call faith or that which we call knowing is unwavering. And then the last one is rhythm. All of life is this thing called rhythm. The natural ebb and flow, just like an ocean wave. And so when things are in the flow, we're happy. We're joyous. It's easy to recognize and to understand that there is this principle being activated. When there is flow, it's easy to understand and to be curious about all of the things that are going on. But when there is an ebb, a seeming ebb, how do we react? What is our go-to? And so, Reverend Ed was telling you a little bit about my work overseas, and that has a lot of ebb and flow. When you're working with governments and developing countries and things that are void of the creature comforts that we experience here, and everything is on a donor basis, there's so much need in the world, and I'm sure you've seen that. There's great need even within our own communities. And oftentimes when we look at that, it's easy to become overwhelmed. In Cambodia, one of the things that launched all of this was just a simple trip there with sightseers and showing them the temples there. And when we got there, and this is back in 2004, all of the people that were on that trip immediately saw the ebb. They saw the poverty. They saw all of the displacement and the hunger. And they naturally wanted to do something. And I had been in those situations before, and I said, let me go to my phone and turn it off. And in my head, but I said to him, take us to where the greatest need is, which is sometimes not the easiest thing for people. Take us to where the greatest need is. And so he did. He took us to a lake in that part of Asia called the Tonle Sap. And in the dry season, when the water recedes, that's where all of the refugees and the displaced and landmine victims, which is a big thing in Cambodia from the civil war that happened in the 70s. All of these people are hungry and desperate. And he goes, in particular, the children. We'll see hundreds of children there that are mostly starving. He said, if you really want to do something, go there. And I'm like, how do you do that? And so we made a game plan. He taught us about you can't bring anything. You have to bring food that's indigenous to their digestive systems. And you can't just show up. He said, I've got to get a message to the matriarch of that village. So even a transient village has a matriarch. And this was before cell phones, and I still don't know how he did it. But by the time we had all gathered in a local market and we were purchasing food, I went to pay for it. And here's the thing, there were 15 of us, so we bought out 3 full markets of food in Cambodia. I went to pay for it, and it was $86. And I remember thinking, wow, even I could figure out something sustainable. And we traveled there, and we got there, and everything was sort of orderly. There was lines of children sitting cross-legged in the cake bed of that river, and we began to pass out that food, and it was a great system for about 7 minutes. And then off in the distance, there was flow, and then off in the distance, hundreds of more children started running towards us because they had heard there were food. And then it turned into absolute chaos. And then all of those markets worth of food were pretty much dispersed in a matter of less than 10 minutes. And when it was all over, one of the women in the group looked down and she burst into tears. And she said, oh my God, look. And we all looked down, and all of our clothes were covered with little muddy handprints where they had been grabbing at us. And everyone got very emotional, and I was about to get emotional too, but I'm the group leader. I'm not supposed to get emotional. But this was different. You know, some people classify it as the ugly cry. I mean, I could feel this well of emotion, but again, it was even more different than that. There was something physiological happening inside my body, and we often talk about a mystical experience. And what is a mystical experience? All that it really is a divine moment where you realize that there's no such thing as separation. That everything is connected. And that was happening on the banks of Cambodia. And it felt really messy. And I searched and searched where to go. And all that there was a pontoon boat. And I crawled on my hands and knees in that pontoon boat, and I wailed like a primal animal. And again, it's hard to put language to it, but it wasn't out of pity. It was this divine realization that what I was seemingly feeding was myself. The little boy back in, you know, that felt he was a burden, the one that used to climb trees to hide, and all of that kind of stuff. There was this connection there. And I remember in that pontoon boat making a decision. And it was not a change, it was a transformative decision. And that was that I would come back and I would try to find a solution. I didn't know what that would be like. And I do want to tell you that that's what transformation is about. It's not about having all of the steps laid out before you. The path of transformation is willingly walking into the unknown, willingly embracing the mystery, beyond any kind of precepts or fear that you might have. And in that pontoon boat, I recalled a quote that I had read in a travel magazine one time. And the guy said, the writer had said, the most powerful mantra that you can ever say is, I'm available. And then he said, look out. Because if you're serious, your whole world will change. And I would say your whole world will transform. And in that smelly pontoon boat, I said, I'm available. And so I came back for 5 years and made a lot of mistakes. And after the 5th year, found a local Cambodian man that I was aligning with, and we started to dig wells. And one of the well expeditions, I asked him about all of the displaced children that I saw that didn't have education. That led to a conversation about building schools and applying for all of the NGO paperwork that needed to happen. And one thing led to another, and it's an incredible set of stories. But today we have 2 campuses. And in Cambodia, just Cambodia alone, we have over 600 children. And it's everything from life skills and computer training and English to fine arts and sewing and all of the stuff that offers them a pathway of a better life, of breaking the cycle of illiteracy and poverty. We've placed that work over to India, and lately we've been working with young girls in Guatemala to free them from abusive situations in order to give them education as well. And all of that just from saying I'm available. So I want to leave you with that this morning to say, if transformation is something that you and I really say that we want, then simply say I'm available. And in the workshop, if you come back, I will give you some tools that will help you with that process. But when you think of those things, curiosity, what was the second one? Principle, and rhythm. Even in the absence of the solution is there when you recognize that. I had to laugh because it's CPR. So that CPR, that thing that is life-giving, is the thing that brings us back into the alignment of the care of capital S of self. So it is. Oh, again, just as we did earlier, just put your feet flat on the floor. This time, even open the palms of your hand in welcoming the gift. And the gift today is the gift of transformation. The transformation that is our encoded genes. The part of us that may be lying dormant, that is constantly seeking our attention. And so just for the brief moment of this prayer, I ask that you say, I'm available to that encoded genius inside of you. Just repeat that, I'm available. And what we know is that we don't need to know the how. In fact, the how is none of our business. Because that which is intelligence knows the how. It is simply our responsibility to continue to show up. To show up with joy, to show up with enthusiasm, to show up even in the appearance of the absence of that which is solution, to show up so that solution may reveal itself. So we invite this in. We know this to be our truth. We increase our allowing and we decrease our resistance. And we let today be the benchmark, so that as we look at the thing that was our ceiling, we know that it can become our floor. And a new ceiling is established, and then that ceiling becomes our floor. And then a new ceiling is established, and then that becomes our floor. And we realize that we are always perpetually spiraling up into the possibility of our transformation. And so we welcome that. We say yes to that. And as we know it individually, we also know it collectively. We know it for this community, CSL Greater Boston. We know it for each and every person that sits physically in this room, and we know it for every single person that watches via the media and all of the other outlets that they have access to. May we be reminded of this today. May our hearts receive it, and may we say, I am available. And so it is. So it is.
Thank you, Reverend David. Thank you, thank you. Now is the time we welcome our guests. If you're here for the first time and if you feel comfortable, we ask you to say your name and where you're from. And I have a gift for you. So, who would like to begin?
I will.
Thank you.
I'm Reverend Hadra Rahim from Brooklyn, New York, with 117.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm Reverend Riley. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, 107.
Well, you know each other. You know each other?
Yeah, right.
I'm Adeline Kimball. I'm from Los Angeles. And
of grace.